Hello, and welcome to the Days of Yore. Today, we'll be talking about the wreck of the Vicksburg, a ship built on Beaubears Island in 1863, and that was wrecked in the Pentland Firth in 1884. My sources today come from the British Newspaper Archive, which covered a great deal on the Board of Trade inquiry that happened after the wreck. So I'll begin, of course, as I always do, by saying that I'm not an expert and I'm just an interested historian who is giving this information to you largely for narrative purposes. So, the Vicksburg was built in 1863 on Beaubears Island by the firm of Harley and Sons, which is well known for its craftsmanship at that time. The Vicksburg drew its name from the Civil War siege that was happening at that same time, in that same year. In July of 1863, General Ulysses S. Grant led the Union Army in besieging Vicksburg and taking Vicksburg, a major Confederate city in the course of the Civil War. So, as many owners on Beaubears Island did, they drew inspiration from current events in the naming of their ships. So, for many years, the Vicksburg sailed the world's oceans, mostly hauling cargo. So in July of 1884, some 21 years after it had been constructed, the Vicksburg undertook a notable voyage to Quebec. So it was hauling coal at this time and left Leith in Scotland and was heading for Quebec. Now it encountered some pretty strong headwinds on its way under the command of Captain John Bruce Watson. Now, in order to get, around the island of Great Britain and head into the Atlantic Ocean, the captain opted to head through the Pentland Firth rather than traveling all the way around the Orkney Islands. And he decided to cut through the Pentland Firth. So the Pentland Firth was a very dangerous waterway because of the many rocky islands known as skerries. That's Skerries, although I'm sure in their own way they were very frightening. So the number of rocky islands through the Pentland Firth, that's known as the Pentland Skerries, made any voyage very treacherous. And in the midst of high winds, they were all that much more so. But Captain John Bruce Watson felt that his experience, having traveled through the Pentland Firth more than 60 times, would see him through. He thought that guiding the ship by way of the land and following where the land led would be a good strategy and would mitigate the effect of the wind. Unfortunately, Captain John Bruce Watson was very wrong. And the Vicksburg was driven by the wind out of the largest of these rocky islands, at that time known as the Great Skerry, today known as Muckle Skerry. And the ship was torn apart within 30 minutes. 9 sailors lost their lives in this wreck. And I'll read their names here. Thomas McNichol, age 34. William Daly, age 33. C. Peterson, age 35. Henry Wilson. L.N. Steinquest, aged 41. And T.A. Olson, aged 33. John Widburn, aged 45. John Overon, aged 34. And Peter Greenhouser, aged 21. So, again, these 9 men lost their lives, some when a lifeboat was overturned by a wave, and others when the ship went down and they were too weak in the midst of the freezing water to save themselves. So we see from the list of crew that there were men drawn both from the United Kingdom but also from Scandinavia. We often have a tendency to think of these ships as really being crewed by Britons or Irish crews, or crews really drawn from the islands of Great Britain, but and Ireland. But that was not the case. There were in fact multinational crews who's on any number of these ships, and as we see here. So 9 men lost their lives, but 11 men were saved, including Captain John Bruce Watson. Lighthouse keepers on Muckle were able to save those 11 men. John Bruce Watson himself was so benumbed by the water that he was unable to grab the rescue rope who flung to him, and had to really bite into it and hold onto that rope with his teeth in order to be saved. His hands were so frozen. So this was a great tragedy, no question about it. However, there were questions that arose out of it. And the Board of Trade decided that the only way to have these questions answered would be to hold a board of inquiry. And magistrates were therefore gathered to investigate the conduct of Captain John Bruce Watson. Had his actions in some way contributed to this crash and the subsequent loss of life? So in his defense, Captain Watson cited his 30 years of experience, 13 of which had been in command. So he had been a captain for 13 years. So again, he said that he had all the experience that he needed in order to do this. He, again, at that time, cited that he had been through the Pentland Firth 60 times. However, some members of his crew told a different story. The thinking went that in a situation like this, sailors were like to act rashly. This was not common operating procedure. A wreck situation meant that tempers would be running high. That people might do things that they otherwise wouldn't, and so officers would need to be in place on those lifeboats. But the first and second mate both indicated that no such orders had been given. And also, one of the sailors, William Piddock, did indicate that when the first lifeboat had been overturned by the waves, the captain made no effort to save those men who had been in that lifeboat, and that such was the fear on board. And after having seen that many men refused to get out of the lifeboats, for fear that they would meet the same fate. Mr. Piddock also indicated that the captain had been behaving a little strangely ahead of the actual accident. He had been conducting the ship in something of an irresponsible manner. So all of this testimony was sufficient to convince the magistrates that this wreck had been caused by negligence, and that improper procedure had resulted in the deaths of these 9 men. So they suspended the captain's license for 6 months. Now, Captain John Bruce Watson was able, in time, to have that decision reversed. A new set of magistrates put more weight on his testimony than that of his crew, and concluded that he had not vacillated any more than what could be considered normal in a situation like that, and that he had been guilty not of negligence, but rather of the far less egregious crime of an error in judgment. Well, again, at this far removal of time, it's hard to say. None of us were there. But it's certainly very tragic that 9 men lost their lives in the midst of this wreck. The Pentland Firth would remain in a very dangerous passage for many years, and lighthouse keepers would be integral to the safety of seamen traveling through there for many years to come, maybe even to this day. But I think that's where we'll leave things for today. If you like what we're doing here on this channel, myself and my colleague Ken Walker would very much appreciate your liking the video, subscribing to this channel. If you're able, please consider looking at our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. And if you're able to support us in that way, we would very much appreciate it. But for now, I will see you in 2 weeks. Ken will be back next week, so I'm sure you're very much looking forward to that. For the Days of Yore, I'm Dr. Sean McCarthy. Thank you ever so much, and we'll see you again.